Good morning. Today we start a 3-week series on the Psalms. Prepare, receive, and rejoice. And how some of the Psalms invite us to prepare to receive God into our life, to receive Him, and to rejoice at His presence. And so this morning we start with Psalm 130, which is one of the penitential psalms, that is, one of the handful of psalms in which the writer acknowledges their own sin and their need for redemption. Psalm 130 in some ways encapsulates the human condition, the predicament of being human and of relying on grace. The psalmist starts in the depths. Out of the depths I cry from you. In Latin it is de profundis, and sometimes that's what this psalm is called. And I wish when I say de profundis that I had a deep Barry White-like voice and I could say de profundis. But I have this tinny tenor that I'm stuck with, but we work with what we have. And so the psalmist calls out from the status of being in the depths. And we learn that part of that being in the depths is from his sin. And that is a depth, a status in which we all find ourselves. That status of being in sin. And yet sin is still a challenge to us. We want to say of ourselves that we are part of a sinful humanity, an imperfect humanity, and yet not accept that we have personal responsibility in that big S sin and in those little s sins. We're glad to make a distinction between our foibles and our neighbor's sins. I may share a bit of a rumor, or I might be jealous of something I see, but that's not really sin. I may look across at a pretty lady, experience lust in my heart, but that's not really sin. That's a human foible. My neighbor, he sins. But it is those little sins. It is those little sins that are cumulative. Those sins that we do not acknowledge, that build up and perhaps are more important than the big sins. Because we know about the big sins. Because we pay attention to the big sins. And really, it is only through acknowledging our own sin that we can understand what that sin is. And really, it's the only way that we can understand our need for grace and our need for deliverance from that sin. Because we tend to concentrate on sin. When we imagine sin, we imagine the big ticket items, right? We imagine basically those things that have legal ramifications. Things that we would get arrested for, or things that we would get sued for. And we don't have to warn our neighbors about the big ticket items. We assume that if our friend is going to commit a murder, if our friend is going to steal a car, the friend knows that that's wrong. And yet we are called to lovingly, non-judgmentally, share when we see sin. To share that those little sins do accumulate. That those little sins, the 1,000 little cuts, are the things that continue to separate us from God. They are the things that build up and create that wedge between us and God. And yet, in the face of those sins, the psalmist reminds us that God does not mark iniquities. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, Lord, who could stand? Who indeed could stand? That the idea of marking iniquities, it reminds me of when I was in elementary school in the third or the fourth grade, and there would be names on the chalkboard, and each time you did something significantly wrong, the teacher would put a mark at a merit by your name so that there was a literal accounting of your errors. But this is not what God does. The psalmist says there is forgiveness within you so that you may be revered. The adaptation of the Bible, called The Message, says that forgiveness is your habit. Because if God did count, if God calculated all of our iniquities, none of us could stand. None of us could be before him. But of course, not only is the God we love and the God who loves us not one to make those marks, he is one who sent his Son that would be an eraser for those marks. That even if they did get counted, none would show. And of course, we live our life in these depths, near these depths, but not just because of sin. We're there because of sorrow as well, the danger of sorrow. And really, if we acknowledge honestly our middle-class lives, our middle American lives, our worst days are better than the best days of most of the world. We live without hunger. We live without fear of the elements. We live in a community that loves us. And yet, that does not decrease the reality of that sorrow to us. The ability of genuine grief to draw us into the depths. And there are times in our lives, there are seasons in our lives when we seem happy in the depths, when we seem as though we don't want to move on. I had a friend this week post on social media a picture of Alcatraz. And she pointed out that for many of the prisoners in Alcatraz, the worst thing was not being imprisoned, not being behind bars. But it was the fact that from Alcatraz they could see across the bay and see the lights of excitement, of joy, of love, of freedom, and know that that was shut off to them. And my friend suggested, how often is that like us? That we isolate ourselves in our island of sorrow, in the depths, on our island, able to see across, able to remember, able to know what it is like to be in love, to be in forgiveness, to be in excitement, and yet unwilling to make the crossing, unwilling to get into the boat that God offers us to help us escape the depths, to help us escape our Alcatraz of sorrow. And yet, when we listen to the psalmist, we know that he is one who has escaped in the past. He is one who has embraced God and has been out of the depths and yet finds himself here again. because the psalmist is waiting, he is hoping, he is anticipating, he is preparing. And we realize that hope accompanied by confidence often leads us to preparation. The psalmist is confident. This is someone who has known God, who is preparing to embrace God again. And really that nature of being in the depths and rising with God's help out of them and yet risking being back into them is one of the dangers of living a life in faith. By living on the edge, by sharing our love, we risk returning to the depths. We have fallen, and we know it is possible that we will fall again. The bravest among us are likely to be the most brokenhearted because we are willing to love with the risk that that love may not be returned to us. We are willing to share love that may not come back to us, that may leave us wanting for human love because we were willing to offer it freely. And yet, those depths that we are offered an escape from cannot hold one who embraces God, who loves them. As the psalmist celebrates his hope, he then commends his hope to his community. He says, "O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is great power to redeem." And so the psalmist is excited not just about the promise of the redemption from sin, the promise of the sins being lifted off of his shoulders. It is not just that the sin is gone. The psalmist is excited about being able to live life side by side with the one who can forgive him. He is excited about living day by day with divine mercy. It is not just the absence of sin, but it is the power and the compassion and the one who has them that ignites the psalmist. It is the one who can greet the psalmist's sadness with surprise, who can meet his depression with deliverance, who can face his sin because of the salvation. As we close today's service, we will be singing the hymn, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." And this hymn was written by Thomas Dorsey, not Tommy Dorsey, the band leader, but a different Tommy Dorsey, Thomas Dorsey, who was a professional musician. And Dorsey was one who combined hymns and gospel tunes with jazz and blues. He was raised in the South and he moved to Chicago. And these are his words about the writing of the hymn, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." Back in 1932, I was 32 years old and a fairly new husband. My wife, Nettie, and I were living in a little apartment on Chicago's South Side. One hot August afternoon, I had to go to St. Louis, where I was to be the featured soloist at a large revival meeting. I didn't want to go. Nettie was in the last month of pregnancy with our first child, but a lot of people were expecting me in St. Louis. In the steaming St. Louis heat, the crowd called on me to sing again and again. When I finally sat down, a messenger boy ran up with a Western Union telegram. I ripped open the envelope. Pasted on the yellow sheet were the words, "Your wife just died." When I got back, I learned that Nettie had given birth to a boy. I swung between grief and joy. Yet that night, the baby died. I buried Nettie and our little boy together in the same casket, and then I fell apart. For days, I closeted myself. I felt that God had done me an injustice. I didn't want to serve him anymore or write gospel songs. I just wanted to go back to that jazz world I once knew so well. But still, I was lost in grief. Everyone was kind to me, especially a friend, Professor Fry, who seemed to know what I needed. On the following Saturday evening, he took me up to Malone's Poro College, a neighborhood music school. It was quiet. The late evening sun crept through the curtained windows. I sat down at the piano, and my hands began to browse over the keys. And it was there that Dorsey wrote one of the great American hymns of the 20th century. Thomas Dorsey understood what it means to be in the depths, what it means to be in a darkness that we can't understand, even a darkness not of our own making. And yet, Thomas Dorsey also understood what it meant to accept that offer of a boat, of a raft, God's gift of love that is an escape, a release from those depths. Dorsey understood that there was confidence to be had in a God who forgives and a God who loves. Will you pray with me? God, you offer us so much in our lives. You offer us friends and family, and you have offered us a Christ who gave his life for our salvation. And Lord, even when we are in our depths, even when darkness surrounds us, help us to remember and to have confidence in your love that is present with us always, present to elevate us, to draw us closer to you through forgiveness, through warmth, through comfort. And God, help us to remember too that as your children and your servants, there are times when we are called to be your hands and feet, to help draw others from those same depths, to help remind others of your love, of your spirit that runs through your world, through this world, and through us, and to help remind others of the saving power of your Son Christ, in whose name we pray.